around, data and AI, obviously, don't get any brownie points for saying that, but in terms of applications, I think it's starting to look at, okay, where are those major applications? Obviously in relation to detection, anything in relation to fraud, financial crime, building out those AI networks to think using different methodologies to think, okay, well, how can we best detect where there might be activities occurring that are illegal, that we need to stamp down on. So I think there's a whole kind of detection space, to say, on crime. I think there's a big area in regulatory reporting, one of the most Cinderella areas of the whole of regulation. But it's actually those fundamental building blocks on which the rest of regulation is built, and firms themselves are building their own decision making. So if they don't have decent MI, then they're not making the right decisions if regulators don't have decent understanding of what firms are doing. But as I say, nobody really can say you can get excited about regulatory reporting, actually. But there's a massive opportunity there, because to bring tech into that space, but also to do very different things with rules. So I'm a lawyer by background, and the idea that you could have machine readable rules gives a little bit of a heart flutter, right, to a lawyer, because you're going, oh, I need a human in there just to make sure that it's being interpreted and applied correctly. But sometimes actually we possibly don't. And so talk there of, therefore, how can we just streamline this process, but also just identify what we want. So there's a couple of activities there. I think also there's huge opportunities then for anybody who can come into this space with different interfaces to make some of those different interactions much easier. There's also lots of scope for product innovation and new players coming in as we get, a prospect, for example, of an Amazon coming in to start to provide banking and payment services. We've seen Apple come in on the side, but when we start to look at big tech and the amount of data they have and the capacity that they have, then that's quite both exciting and quite, if you're a regulator, a big kind of intake of breath moment to think, right, okay, how are we going to be able to facilitate that? No, we don't want to smother it, but actually make sure that happens in a way which is safe. I think the more regulators can explain the thinking behind the rules rather than just you must comply with Rule 4.5.c, then the more banks can get on that conversation. And the more we can have a conversation about the ethos and the aims, then the more we'll be able to sort of co-create some solutions together. As where banks are on that spectrum, different institutions have different kind of attitudes, and different bits of institutions have different attitudes. That's inevitably going to be the case. But I think there is, as I say, quite a real understanding that if we get this right, it could be really exciting. But at the same time, we've seen what happens to models in the past, and as we know, the issue about AI is, well, how do you get accountability of your machine learning and of your AI? So where are we going to allow that to be used, and do we have sufficient understanding of it, both within the industry and within the regulators as well? I could do a plug for RegTech Associates. It's vital, okay, the RegTech Associates is in there as a valued intermediary. So I'll get my commission later. But in terms of having those intermediaries who can act, as I say, between that interface between your bank's data reporting, IT systems, et cetera, and the regulators over here, there's always a role for intermediaries to play to enable people to identify, well, who are going to be our trusted partners, as I say, in relation to just product validation and product verification. You need to know, well, actually, am I going to be sold a dud, or am I going to be sold something which is actually going to do what I want it to do and is going to do it in a way which is legally compliant, respects privacy, data security, all the things that we're much more concerned about now, rightly so, than perhaps we were or even realised we needed to be previously. So, having somebody out there as a validator for, what could be a trusted product or way of doing things then just enables people to navigate that quite complex marketplace. Okay, so this has been a phenomenon for a while, particularly post-crisis. So post-crisis, you had we've all got to pull together, right? So you had quite sort of centripetal tensions, as it were. We've all got to do the same, because otherwise there's lots of scope for arbitrage and people just go to the lowest regulated area. But as that kind of pressure dies back and it fades back in memory, then more countries just want to go their own way and do things their own way, which is justified, kind of suits their markets, suits the way that their markets operate, their consumers want to buy products, etc., their tax systems. But it does mean that if you are a global operator trying to navigate the complexity of up to 152 different regulatory systems, and more if they're on a federated basis, is a nightmare. To be frank, it just is a nightmare. And again, tech can really help there, because one of the difficult things is even just reading all those rules. So if you can actually develop tech that will enable you to understand what your regulatory requirements are, how you can demonstrate compliance, how you might need to reorientate your systems, or even just be able to extract data from your databases in a way that will just meet the reporting requirements of every jurisdiction around the world. I mean, it's a geeky nirvana, right? But it's still a nirvana, as it were, in relation to that very day-to-day operational business of actually being able to comply. Oh, for sure, right? But what you're always trying to, the question we always have to ask, and it's a societal question as much as a regulatory question, is, well, how safe is safe enough, right? How much risk do you want to allow people to take? So I was just reading, actually, as I came in, on the use of health data. So you go on your app and you put in your steps, or you look something up in relation to a kind of condition you might have or whatever. And, where is that data being used? Well, it turns out that it's being used in ways that you didn't think it was going to be used. Okay, well, that might be innovative, enable other people to develop new products and target ads at you for that new product, but do you want that? Okay, so yes, we could have regulation, in fact we do have regulation in that case, that comes in and says, well, you shouldn't be using data for that purposes. Okay, that will mean that those new products aren't going to be developed in that way. But that's the societal trade-off, okay, you have to take. And the same is true in relation to financial regulation or any types of innovation. So yes, it can stifle innovation, but sometimes you might not want that innovation because it might pose too many risks. The problem is it's very difficult to run those controlled experiments sometimes to know, well, should we allow it over here and not allow it over there, particularly if it's of a highly systemic kind of nature. So yes, it can, but the challenge is always to get that balance right, and it's never going to be right for all time, right? Because society's attitude is going to keep changing and keep evolving.